This is our continuing sessions of Gita from Zero. This is session 7. And today we're going to be talking about the Mahābhārata, how the Bhagavad Gita fits into the Mahābhārata. So we'll see how that goes today.
Very interesting.
Let me... So if you're interested in what's happening when, we have, this is our dates. Today is 2/8. So today we're going to be talking about the Mahābhārata. Next week we'll be talking about different branches of Hinduism, how Bhagavad Gita fits in with different branches of Hinduism. On the 22nd, we'll be talking about different interpretations. And then on the 1st of March, we'll be talking a little bit about how Bhagavad Gita fits against Western philosophy. I'll update this as we move along, because these are all introduction phases of Bhagavad Gita before we start talking about Bhagavad Gita. So we talked about it from a philosophical point of view, and then 2 weeks ago we talked about it from a historical point of view, how and when things happened in the great scale of time. So today we're going to be talking about the Mahābhārata. So this is our... Actually, we're doing 6 here, so this is the Mahābhārata in Vedic literature. We're going to start off with a Gita excerpt because, as I've been saying, that since we are doing a lot of introduction, Prabhupada did a long introduction to his Bhagavad Gita as well. So I wanted to also do an introduction and deal with some issues before we start with Bhagavad Gita. And then all these are uploaded to YouTube, so that if you miss one or you weren't clear about something, you can go back and watch it, you know. So if you're in the WhatsApp chat from Gita from Zero, then you get all these updates and you know where to look for all this stuff. So we have a Gita excerpt today, and then we'll be talking about Vedic literature in a broad overview, and then we'll talk about those terrible names. And then we'll talk about Gita and how it relates to the Mahābhārata. So I'm trying to see if I can work on myself to be able to keep these 2 very bite-sized chunks, but I always seem to fail. Let's see if I do better today. So here's our Gita verse from today. This is from 15th chapter. Sarvasya chaham hridisannivishto matasmritir jnanam pohanam cha Vedas cha sarvairaham eva vedyo vedanta krut veda vid eva chaham. I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. By all the Vedas am I to be known. Indeed, I am the compiler of Vedanta, and I am the knower of the Vedas. So, what's important here is that it's the second part that I'm focusing on. Vedas cha sarvairaham eva vedyo vedanta krit veda videva chaham. So the Vedas, what are the Vedas supposed to do? They're supposed to give someone a knowledge of Krishna. This is what Krishna says in the Vedas about the Vedas. So if someone studies the Vedas and they don't know anything about Krishna, they've missed the entire point of the Vedas, because Krishna is saying what the purpose of the Vedas is. It's to know him. And of course, he's saying he's the compiler of Vedanta. He's the one who originally emanated the Vedas, and he is the knower of the Vedas. So if we're wondering whether to believe the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna's speaking it, and he's saying he's the knower of the Vedas. So he knows them, he is the creator of the Vedas, and he is the goal of the Vedas. If, those 3 things we have to focus in on, because People will quibble about these things. Why are we interested in the Vedas? Why are we interested only in Bhagavad Gita? How about the other parts of the Vedas? And we're going to see how big the Vedas are in a minute. So why are we interested in this? And it's because Krishna says he is to be known by the Vedas. This is also corroborated in other places, but I just wanted to bring that out. And this is our piece from the Bhagavad Gita today. Any questions? I'm going to move kind of quickly. Can I get someone to can you be the mic person? Hold the microphone to the person speaking. Don't give the microphone to them. Just hold it, because when people speak and they hold the microphone, they do weird things with it.
You can sit.
No. I'm fine. I'm doing a video, so well, okay.
Sorry.
No, just.
So we are see the Vedas is the written by Vyasdev.
Right.
And Vyasdev, he divided the 4 Veda. Like Samved, Yajurved, Atharvaved.
Right.
So he's not satisfied when Vedas then is explained himself. Then he's not satisfied. Then he divided the 4 Veda, Vyasdev. Then Vyasdev also we know Krishna power, another power. Krishna power is Vyasdev. But finally Vyasdev is the one we call Rishi. Rishi. Maharshi.
Right.
Maharshi. So Vyasdev, when we beginning in Bhagavad Gita, we study, first we say and praying Om Gana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chashkurun Militam Janatashmoy Sigurube Namo. So this is remarkable. We gotta pray for Vyasdev because he first time open our eyes, transcendental eyes. So Vyasdev is most important. And so why the Vyasdev is not satisfied, and how come he explained the first devotee of Sanjay. Sanjay was sit down in the house and battlefield was war. War was battlefield and Sanjay was in the house and Sanjay watching all war from the house.
Right.
But because Sanjay was the pure devotee of Vyasdev, then Vyasdev gave him power to transcendental eye. Then he saw from all of the battlefield what's happening, Krishna and Arjuna who are talking about the battlefield, entire history, entire war. Then he explained everything. This is the Krishna and Arjuna versus Krishna and Arjuna greatest dialogue in battlefield.
Do you have a question, or you're just...
Yeah, but my question is, somebody says, who is the Sanjay? Mahābhārata history, I don't found the name, who is Sanjay?
Who is Sanjay?
Exactly.
Well, he's a disciple of Vyasadeva, that much we know. More than that, I don't really know much about Sanjay.
Yeah,
I can research it, but...
Previously, I don't know. Sanjay was the her son, her father, his father.
Right.
This question one time I don't know. Really.
Well, I can research that in the Puranic encyclopedia, but I don't have an answer for you right now. You have a question? You don't have a question anymore.
No. I'm good now. Yeah, I will.
Okay. All right. So this was our bit. That. If we focus in on this makes a lot of sense, that Krishna is saying he's the goal of the Vedas, he's the knower of the Vedas, he's the creator of the Vedas. And we'll find out that there are several different explanations of how the Vedas came to be. One of them is that Krishna was blowing his flute and Brahma heard the flute, and from that flute, the Vedas came out of Brahma's mouth. He has 4 mouths, so out of each of the 4 mouths, the Vedas were coming out. And then they came out in no particular order, so later on he assembled them and put them into some categories. So that's one thing. Another explanation of the Vedas is by the fanning of Garuda's wings. Another explanation of the Vedas is that we will see that Krishna is speaking the Vedas to Arjuna right here on the battlefield. So that is another, explanation of how the Vedas come to us. And he says that he spoke to the sun god Vivishwan. So there are a number of different ways the Vedas come to us, but they come to us from the very beginning of time. We've already discussed that. So I'm going to move on to the next bit here. So now we can look what is your name, Prabhu?
Ray.
Ray.
R-A-Y, Ray.
Ray, okay. So as Ray was saying, these are all written by Vyasadeva. We talked about how in modern colleges and in various kinds of academic institutions, they do not think that the Vedas were written by a single author. Rather, they think that the Vedas were written by many people. But the Vedas don't say that. The Vedas say they were written by Vyasadeva.
Yes.
So, and they were written 5,000 years ago. And the other day, 2 weeks ago, we talked about how modern Indology and modern academic explanations say the Vedas were much more recent. So we don't agree with either that they're recent or that they were written by different people. So here are a breakdown. We have the 4 Vedas. The Rig, Yajur, Sama, and Atharva Veda. So Rig, Yajur, Sama, and Atharva Veda. And in Bhagavatam we hear that these are broken into various branches by Vyasadeva's disciples. So each disciple, Prabhupada calls them professors. They take one of these branches and divide it. So the Rig Veda was divided into 21 branches, the Yajur Veda into 100 branches, Sam Veda into 1,000 branches, Atharva Veda into 9 branches. So altogether you've got 1,130 branches. Now each of these were further subdivided, if that wasn't enough. So if that wasn't enough, they're further divided into Samhitas. Now Samhitas refers to the original Vedas, the way they were originally spoken. The Brahmanas are a division of these same 4 Vedas, but now for performing sacrifices. Usually, in ancient times, the householders would have Brahmanas come and they would perform sacrifices to sanctify the house, to make auspicious circumstances, to ward off evil or bad events, etc., etc. So there's a whole group of Vedic writings that come from these Rig, Sama, Atharva, and Yajur Vid. So Yajur means to offer sacrifices. The Sama Veda is about poetic or very beautiful sounds, and so these are the Brahmanas. Now, there was another division called the Aranyakas, and the Aranyakas were a group of Vedic writings that were all done for people who were living in the forest, people who had given up household life and moved to the forest to live in isolation, and they had various duties and activities to perform. So those are the expansions of the Rig, Yajur, Sama, and Atharva Veda for those living in the forest. Now, there's a final expansion called the Upanishads, and there are 108 of those. So the Upanishads, Prabhupada calls them the headlines of the Vedas. That the Upanishads are focusing on the philosophy. So far what we've talked about, if you read the Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda, Atharva Veda, mostly what you'll see is there's various glorifications of demigods and various sacrifices and how they are supposed to be performed for various demigods. And you can wonder, well, if we have all this information, why are we doing all these things? So the Upanishads is where we find the philosophy of why we're doing all these things. So that's why Prabhupada didn't bother to translate the Rig Veda, the Yajur Veda, the Sama Veda, or Atharva Veda. He didn't translate any of those. Rather, he translated the Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and Chaitanya Charitamrita.
That is the branch.
Wait. Where's our...
I'm sorry. Srimad Bhagavatam, it's just a branch of some...
Right,
yeah,
right.
Okay.
It comes under Puranas here, the 11. Mm-hmm. We haven't even gotten to that yet, but we will. Right. So...
total we have 18 Purana, right? 18 Purana.
Do wait till the microphone comes, because I'm recording this and putting it up. Otherwise, your voice won't come across on
so
that.
So total... we have 18 Puranas.
Yeah.
18.
18
and Srimad Bhagavatam is the Mahapuran.
Yeah. Srimad Bhagavatam is also sometimes called the Bhagavat Purana. It's sometimes called the, expansion of the Vedanta Sutra. It has a number of different names. Any rate, just to kind of stay with this same point here, is the Rig, Yajur, Sama Veda, the Samhitas, the Brahmanas, Aranyakas, mostly are just about demigods. And that's why we don't bother reading these very much. And in Bhagavad Gita, we'll see that Krishna says that the Vedas mostly deal with the three modes of nature. So Krishna is explaining that to Arjuna in the 2nd chapter of Bhagavad Gita. So therefore, Krishna is saying these things aren't very important. Later on, he will explain that. And that's why Bhaktivinoda Thakur made the statement that if all the Vedic literature is burned except for Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, there would be no loss to the world. Now, why is all this other stuff there? This other stuff is there because some people have an issue with bhakti. They don't want to perform bhakti. They want to enjoy the material world. So if you want to enjoy the material world, everything you read in Bhagavad Gita or in Bhagavatam will tell you you're a fool, that you should be trying to give up attachment to the material world. So all this other stuff doesn't say that. All this other stuff is how you perform sacrifices to so-called enjoy in the material world. So this is for all those people. I'm getting around to what you were talking about a little bit earlier, Roy. So after the Upanishads were written, then Vedavyasa wrote the Puranas. And then he wanted to sum up the Vedas so that people would understand that there's a common theme throughout the Vedas. It isn't just like, it's a whole book of various writings, like the Canterbury Tales or something like that, or like, somebody doing an anthology of different kinds of automobile repair techniques, It's not like that. It's harmonious, it has one theme. So that's what the Vedanta Sutra was. And then he said, well, many people won't be attracted because these are mostly philosophy. So people find it difficult to listen to philosophy, and that's why I'm trying to make it easy, but I know I don't make it that easy either. So, instead, Vedavyasa thought, I will write philosophy in the form of stories, because people can grasp stories, and they can understand philosophy when they approach philosophy in the form of a story. And these are called the Itihasas, and of course the two are Mahābhārata and the Ramayana. So the Ramayana was not written by Vyasadeva, it was written by Valmiki, but the Mahābhārata, of course, was written by Vyasadeva. So the Mahābhārata was written because Vyasadeva could understand people were not able to absorb philosophy. So he put it in a story form. So this is why Mahābhārata was written. Now, of course, we're talking about Mahābhārata. Why are we talking about it? Because the Bhagavad Gita is one chapter of one Kanda of the Mahābhārata. So the Mahābhārata, we'll find out in a minute, has 100,000 verses. So Srimad Bhagavatam is only 18,000 verses. So Bhagavad Gita is only 700 verses. So we see how much bigger the Mahābhārata is. And again, we'll begin to see that the Mahābhārata, its real focus and its real purpose is the Bhagavad Gita. So beyond all this, so we've talked about all this literature. Vedanta Sutra was very difficult to understand. So Vedavyasa took Vedanta Sutra and he expanded it into what we call the Srimad Bhagavatam. And the Srimad Bhagavatam is also known as the Bhagavat Purana, so it's one of the 18 Puranas. And as you were saying before, Vedavyasa had written the four Vedas, he'd written these Samhitas and Upanishads, and some of his students had expanded all these things, and the Puranas were there, the Vedanta Sutra was there, the Mahābhārata was there, but he was still not satisfied. And he wasn't satisfied, and his spiritual master, who is Narada Muni, came to Vyasadeva and said, my dear Vyasadeva, the reason you're not satisfied is you have not given importance to bhakti. You've talked about all these other things, and you've talked about bhakti for sure, but it's there just like everything else. Like if you walked into a room and there were 50 boxes of things sitting around with different names on them, then all the boxes look the same, if you don't know anything about it. So he did not give importance to bhakti. So now the Srimad Bhagavatam makes up for both of those. The other thing was Vedavyasa himself analyzed that he had not spoken directly about Krishna. Because as we said, by all the Vedas am I to be known. Krishna is saying that he is the goal of the Vedas. So if he's the goal of the Vedas, that means that if we read the Mahābhārata and we don't remember Krishna, we only think about Karna and the Pandavas, we only think about, Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana, then we really haven't understood the Bhagavad Gita or Krishna. So Vedavyasa made the final effort to write Srimad Bhagavatam, which kicks out all these other lower purposes and puts the spotlight squarely on devotional service. And it has the whole 10th canto. And the 10th canto, the only thing 10th canto does is talk about Krishna. Questions about any of that?
You mentioned that we in current Kali Yuga, we're not able to go deep in philosophical issues, philosophy, right? So Mahābhārata was written for, I heard, for people to understand that, like for Shudras and women and etc., so that gives us the chance to understand it, right?
Right. But, we're living in a time where we've all grown up in a culture where everybody is taught how to understand fairly complex things, So, in general, if someone puts their mind to it, they can understand philosophy. And again, Srimad Bhagavatam does what the Mahābhārata does. It tells philosophy in stories. We have the story of Dhruva Maharaj, we have the story of Brahma, we have the story of Indra making various offenses, we have the story of Chitraketu, we have so many stories. And these stories, though, are not like the Mahābhārata. Stories in Srimad Bhagavatam are stories only about devotional service, because the Bhagavatam does not give any importance to other types of religious processes. And there are many, many types of religious processes in the Vedic literatures. And that's what these other books are about. You know, we can learn about the yoga systems. We can learn about doing austerities. We can learn about jnana, various kinds of mystical thinking. We can learn how to develop various kinds of mystic powers. We can learn how to perform sacrifices so we can go to heaven. All these things are there. But also Krishna, just a second.
Astrology also inside. Astrology.
Yeah, but astrology is in Vedangas.
Vedanta.
Yeah, see, there are, actually not Vedangas, but Upavedas. So the Upavedas are, the Jyotirvid, the Dhanurvid, what's the medical? Ayurveda, right, Ayurveda. So these are various things. They're not Vedas per se, but they are part of the Vedic literature because they give practical activities so that people can engage in proper warfare, engage in proper medical activities, engage in astrology and those kind of things. Those are Upavedas. The Vedangas are various other things where you learn, the proper meters for chanting, you learn poetry, you learn various other aspects of the Vedas. So they're kind of like, sort of helper, items in the Vedas. So at any rate, so this is our entire Vedic group of writings. Yes? No, just...
Maharaj, Dandavat, good to see you after a long time. I'm pleased to join your session today. You said that Vedanta Sutra is a summary of all Vedas.
Yeah.
So Bhagavad Gita is also part of Vedanta Sutra, or it's because I heard or I read somewhere that Bhagavad Gita is also summarization of all the Vedas and Vedic literature.
Yeah.
So how you take that, whether it's related to is part of Vedanta Sutra, number one. Number two, in Bhagavad Gita also there's some little pressure or importance given to bhakti comparatively other method of worship, because as Arjuna said that to Krishna that whatever the ways you are explaining to me to do yogas, like sitting and doing pranayama and all, but Arjuna himself said that I don't see that it's a practice that my cup of tea, because my mind is not stable enough. So what's your comment about that?
Okay, so let me see if I can remember both questions. The first question was, is Bhagavad Gita part of the Vedas? We're going to get into talking about that in a minute. We're going to explain that there is a class of Vedic literatures called the Shruti. Shruti means to hear. Yeah, so the Rig, Sama, Atharva, Yajurveda, these are called Shrutis. And these other things, the Puranas, the Bhagavad Gita, the Itihasas, all that are called Smriti. Smriti means to remember. And in the Vedic literatures, it doesn't make any real distinction between Shruti and Smriti. But in modern academia, they do make a big distinction between them, as if the Shruti is primary and the Smriti is some kind of secondary thing. Actually, most of the Vedic information is in the Smriti, in Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam, and the Vedas themselves tell us that the Itihasas, the Mahābhārata, and the Puranas are the fifth Veda, Panchama Vid, so they are the fifth Veda. So, any rate, that's there. And the other question was, what was it?
The focus has been given on bhakti in Bhagavad Gita or not?
Right, yeah. So in Bhagavad Gita, we see that Krishna, from chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, he is explaining different activities. And he's doing that because Arjuna has been grown up in the Vedic tradition. When he was in the forest with the other Pandavas, with his father and his brothers, they learned from sages, and the sages told them all these Vedic things, the 4 Vedas, these various processes, yoga, karma, jnana, all these kind of things they learned. So Krishna knows that. So he takes Arjuna through a little tour of all these things, but finally in the end of chapter 6, he says, let me see if I can remember the verse. I always have trouble with this verse. Tapas vibhyo diko yogi, jnanibhyo pi mato dikaha, karmibhyas chadiko yogi, tasmad yogi bhavarjuna. So that's the verse, He's saying, tapas vibhyo diko yogi, better than the person performing austerities is the yogi. Jnanibhyo pi mato dikaha, better than the jnani is the yogi, and then better than the jnanibhyo pi mato dikaha, then karmibhyo chadiko yogi, better than the karmi is the yogi. Tasmad, therefore Arjuna, tasmad yogi bhavarjuna, therefore Arjuna, you be a yogi. Now, we would think, well, Arjuna didn't meditate, but that's not the kind of yogi Krishna means. In the very next verse, Krishna says, yoginam api sarveshan madgatena antaratmamana. So there he's explaining what kind of yogi he wants Arjuna to be. And we discover the kind of yogi that always thinks about him and works for him. So that is a bhakti yogi, not a dhyan yogi, a meditational yogi. So that's why at the end of Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna doesn't sit down and meditate. He gets on the chariot and fights a war, because if the real purpose of Bhagavad Gita was to sell Arjuna on doing meditational yoga, Arjuna missed the point. He didn't do that in Bhagavad Gita. You had a question.
You were talking about Bhakti Yoga covers all, not covers, just have a the way to devotional service to Lord, so you don't have to meditate or spend time. It's not just because disciplic succession, but just Bhakti Yoga as devotional service will cover all thing. I'm sorry. So I think just Bhakti Yoga in Bhagavad Gita just gives us chance to not just start to meditate and doing this long process to get to the point.
Right.
It's bring us to the point of devotional service, so we can start from it and just grow in that field, right?
Right. And Krishna says that in Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 8, text 28, where he says that the yogi is not bereft of the benefits from practicing meditation, from doing severe austerities. He's not bereft of all these other things. So in other words, Krishna is saying, my dear Arjuna, don't worry that if you perform bhakti yoga, all the other bases are covered. And that's why also in 1866, Krishna says, sarva dharma parityajya. So don't worry about these other dharmas. Just engage in my service, So again, Krishna is acknowledging all this other stuff, all these other paths, all this other information. And the reason it's there is because if people don't want bhakti, at least they're engaging in material desires in a somewhat civilized way, which will keep them from creating a hell on earth, So that's why all this is there. But if someone's already a yogi, they don't need to bother with all this other stuff. And this is the main thing. And this again is why Bhaktivinoda Thakur made that statement, that if just the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam survived, there would be no loss, So it's there for people who really aren't ready or don't want to or have some prejudice against bhakti yoga. But for them, we have all this other stuff. Okay, so these are, this is what always kills me, that when people get a Bhagavad Gita for the first time, out on the street, some devotee comes and says, "Oh, here, this is about meditation yoga. You can read about Bhagavad Gita." Just a second. And just a second. So people are reading, the Bhagavad Gita. The first thing they look at is what is that word? And then they see and then they just see these names and they think, "Ooh," and they close the book and put it on the shelf. So I think these names scare people away from Bhagavad Gita. And, after first chapter, those names disappear. You just have Krishna and Arjuna for the most part. But in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, since it's coming right out of the Mahābhārata, we still have the storyline of Mahābhārata happening. So we're learning that Sanjaya is with Dhritarashtra, and Sanjaya is hearing what's going on in the Battle of Kurukshetra. And then later on we will learn who these people are. Who is Pandu, who's Vyas, who's Duryodhana, who's Dronacharya, who's Draupadi, who's Drupad, who's Dhristadyumna, who the Pandavas are. These are all the names that, if you read Mahābhārata, you know who these people are. If you're just reading Bhagavad Gita, you don't know who these people are. So that's why I'm doing a little preliminary today on Mahābhārata. Questions? Now you had a question.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah.
A few minutes ago we passed already. So Mahābhārata history and Ramayana history. So we basically know Ramayana was before and Mahābhārata was after.
Right.
But Bhagavad Gita chapter 4, I saw Evam Parampara Praptam.
Right. Krishna talks about the sun god, which was even before the Ramayana.
So Ram is appearance, the avatar,
right,
before Krishna.
Yeah.
But Mahābhārata, the history, we know the Krishna. But Ram Yuga you mean Sattva, Treta, Dapur, Kali. The Ram Yuga, Rama was before.
Right.
But same Ram is appearance Krishna.
Yeah, right. So Krishna expands into Ramachandra, and all these avatars come on a schedule. So we have in each yuga some manifestation of Krishna comes in each yuga. Then we learn also there are avatars that come in each manvantar. There are various manvantar avatars, And we have other, kinds of avatars. So Krishna's coming in all kinds of different times, and he comes again and again. Each day of Brahma, Krishna comes one time. The other avatars come more than that, but Krishna comes only one time. And so in the next day of Brahma, Krishna will come again. And Ramachandra is an expansion from Krishna. All right. Someone else? Any other questions? Okay. So I'm going to try to keep this moving here. Here's a short summary of the Mahābhārata. It's got 100,000 verses. Some say 110,000 verses. And there's a story that on the heavenly planets there is 1.5 million verses to the Mahābhārata. So we don't get to see that one. That's the king size edition that we would have to have a cart to put that book on and be able to read the heavenly planets version of the Mahābhārata. So at any rate, the Mahābhārata is the story of kings leading up to and including the Kurukshetra war. Now, most of the Mahābhārata is about what happens after the birth of, we have Dhritarashtra, Pandu, and Vidur. So that's from that point on is where most of the Mahābhārata is, and it takes us through the Battle of Kurukshetra. And then after the Battle of Kurukshetra, we go to the Pandavas ruling, and then after a while, the Pandavas give up the throne And then they ascend to the heavenly planets and, et cetera, et cetera. So the Mahābhārata continues after Bhagavad Gita. It's there before Bhagavad Gita, and then it continues after Bhagavad Gita. So the Bhagavad Gita is in the Bhishma Kanda of Mahābhārata. So Mahābhārata starts with the Adi Kanda, which describes ancient history of the Kuru dynasty, So the Battle of Kurukshetra is between the Kauravas or the Dhartarashtras and the Pandavas. So the Kauravas Kaurava comes from Kuru. So there was a king Kuru, and this king Kuru was the one who did austerities for Kurukshetra. I learned the other day that King Kuru wanted to create a very pious place. So he rode to Kurukshetra on a golden chariot. And when he got there, he smashed the golden chariot and made a big plow. And he got Indra's bull and Yamaraja's buffalo. And he used them to till the land in Kurukshetra. And Indra appeared. And when Indra appeared, Indra said, "Why are you doing this?" And he said, "Because I want to make a place that is so sacred that if anybody dies there, they will go to heaven." And Indra said, Indra laughed at that idea. But eventually, because he was so serious and so very appealing to Indra, Indra finally was won over. And the other demigods didn't buy the idea. They didn't think that was, because they said, you have to do something to go to heaven. You can't just go there because you die in a certain place. So they had a negotiation. And finally, the negotiation was that if you die in battle in Kurukshetra, you will go to heaven. So this sort of presaged this Kurukshetra war, because eventually the war would happen in Kurukshetra, so that's King Kuru. Microphone.
The Kurukshetra field sometimes called the Dharma Sutra. Dharma
Kshetra, right.
Yeah, Dharma Sutra, right? Yeah. So that's the meaning of that. So it was prepared for Dharma Kshetra, right?
So anyone can go there to do dharmic activities, if you perform penances there, or you can engage in a battle there, or you can do any number of sacrificial things, and they become amplified by the fact that you're in Kurukshetra. At least that's the Puranic history of Kuru and how he created this place called Kurukshetra. So in the end, we're going to find out that Duryodhana was supposed to return what was Kandavaprastha, but later it became known as Indraprastha. And the Pandavas ruled over it before the dice match happened. And then after the dice match happened, they lost it. But because Dhritarashtra gave the Pandavas back their territory, then they regained possession of Indraprastha. However, Duryodhana wasn't satisfied. He had one more dice throw. And in that dice throw, they had to go to the forest for 13 years, which they did. And when they came back, they were supposed to get their land back, but Duryodhana wouldn't have it. And he wouldn't even give them 5 cities. So this is one of the reasons why the Battle of Kurukshetra had to happen, is because Duryodhana wouldn't even give up 5 small cities. So the Mahābhārata will explain these things, why the Kurukshetra war was fought, why Arjuna was reticent to fight, why Yudhishthira should be ruler, the various attempts at negotiation. They didn't start off with the fact that let's just get right into it and fight a war. Many people tried to broker a peace between the Kauravas and the Pandavas after the Pandavas came out of exile. After trying to negotiate, no one could convince Duryodhana to give anything to the Pandavas. So, therefore, there was only one solution, that was war. So we learn about the character of Duryodhana. We learn on how Duryodhana and his evil friends tried to kill the Pandavas on a number of different occasions. We learn about the insult to Draupadi. We'll learn about how they were exiled because of the gambling match into the forest. We learn that Krishna is God, in the Mahābhārata. And then we learn that there were a whole group of demons who were being born on earth. And because all these demons were gradually taking birth on the earth planet, the demigods asked Krishna to do something. And Krishna said, "Don't worry, I will come." And so Krishna came and he did away with many of these demons. And finally, in a wholesale attempt to do away with many, many, many demons, Krishna had the Battle of Kurukshetra. Okay, any questions about that? Okay, good. So that's our first section. So now we'll have a little test.